The moment Lucas stepped into the vibrant party, he didn't expect his world to collapse. Amid the laughter and music, his eyes locked onto Clara, his wife, laughing intimately with another man. Her smile, once his alone, now belonged to a stranger. Rage, betrayal, and heartbreak collided within him as he realized the life they'd built was unraveling before his eyes. This was more than a mistake. It was the beginning of a revelation that would change everything. But before we dive deeper into this gripping story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss out. The party was alive with a pulse of energy that seemed almost tangible. The bass from the music thudded against the walls, loud enough to reverberate in your chest. Flashing lights painted the room in vivid bursts of color, alternating between warm ambers and cool blues, as shadows danced unpredictably in the kaleidoscopic glow. Laughter rang out, mingling with the kaleidoscopic glow and the occasional burst of celebratory cheers. It was a space teeming with life and joy, a scene carefully curated for merriment. Lucas stepped inside, his eyes momentarily dazzled by the dazzling lights and the vibrant crowd. A small smile played on his lips as he adjusted to the electric atmosphere, his initial excitement evident. Yet, as he scanned the room, an inexplicable wave of unease began to creep in, gnawing at the edges of his anticipation. Something felt off. As Lucas moved deeper into the crowd, his eyes instinctively searched for Clara. He pictured her radiant smile, the one he had always cherished, lighting up the room. And then he found her, but not in the way he'd imagined. She was standing in the far corner, her laughter cutting through the noise like a blade. It wasn't the laughter that struck him, but the way she leaned slightly toward the man beside her. The stranger's hand rested lightly on her back, his thumb moving in a way that spoke of a familiarity Lucas had never witnessed before. Clara's head tilted in his direction, her lips curved in a smile that no longer felt like his. Lucas froze, the scene before him stealing the breath from his lungs. What am I seeing? He thought, his mind racing to make sense of what was unfolding. His heart hammered against his ribs, a heavy, sickening rhythm that echoed in his ears. He wanted to believe he was mistaken, that this was innocent, a misread moment. But deep down, the truth gnawed at him. She's not supposed to smile like that with anyone but me. The realization hit him like a blow to the chest, sharp and merciless. His throat tightened as anger surged through him, hot and consuming. The years they had built together, the promises they had made, all seemed to unravel before his eyes. How could she do this, he wondered, his disbelief teetering on the edge of fury. His fingers curled into fists as he struggled to keep his composure. But it was too late. The cracks in his armor had already begun to show. Lucas felt his world crumble, piece by piece, as he stood there, powerless to stop it. He had never felt so betrayed, so utterly alone. Lucas pushed through the crowd, his steps heavy with purpose. Each stride felt like a battle, his emotions churning, rage, disbelief, and a faint, desperate hope that maybe he'd misjudged what he saw. His gaze never wavered from Clara, who was still laughing, oblivious to his approach. Her red dress shimmered under the lights, a stark contrast to the cold, hollow feeling rising in his chest. When he reached her, the air seemed to shift. Clara turned, her laughter dying mid-sote as her eyes met his. Her face fell, shock, then guilt, flashing like lightning across her expression. "Lucas," she whispered, her voice trembling. The man beside her stiffened, his hand sliding from Clara's back as if it burned. Lucas's sharp gaze locked onto him for a moment, a stranger, now tangled in the wreckage of what had once felt unbreakable. "What is this?" Lucas demanded, his voice low but cutting, barely contained anger simmering beneath the surface. Clara opened her mouth, her lips parting in a desperate attempt to speak, but no words came out. The weight of her silence was deafening. "So, this is it," Lucas thought bitterly. "All the late nights, the distant looks. I ignored them, convinced myself they meant nothing, and here she is, laughing with someone else, as if the life we built together is just a fleeting joke. Lucas, it's not what you think, Clara finally managed, her tone pleading, her hands rising as though she could physically undo the moment. Her eyes searched his face for a glimmer of forgiveness, of understanding, but found none. It's not what I think. Lucas's voice broke, the bitterness cutting through the din of the party. I don't need you to explain, Clara. I've seen enough. The man tried to step back, awkward and visibly uncomfortable. I didn't mean to. Don't. Lucas's glare silenced him instantly. You've done enough. Clara reached for him, her hand trembling, but Lucas stepped back, shaking his head. No, he said firmly, his voice quieter now but filled with finality. It's over. No. Those words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Clara's eyes widened, her lips trembling as tears threatened to spill. Lucas, please, she began, her voice breaking. But Lucas turned away. As he walked back through the crowd, his heart felt like it was shattering with every step. How did it come to this? Was there something I missed? Something I could have done to stop this from happening? Or was this inevitable, no matter how much I gave? Behind him, Clara stood frozen, the weight of his words sinking in. What have I done? She thought, her chest tightening with regret. I never wanted it to come to this. I didn't want to hurt him, not like this. The man beside her muttered something, but she barely registered it. All she could see was Lucas walking away, his back rigid with pain and anger. The lights seemed dimmer now, the music dull and distant. Clara's hands fell to her sides, her nails digging into her palms as tears finally spilled down her cheeks. Lucas didn't look back, his resolve unshakable. He stepped out of the party and into the night, leaving behind not just Clara, but everything they once shared. The house was eerily quiet as Lucas closed the door behind him, the soft click of the latch sounding impossibly loud. The silence engulfed him, heavy and oppressive, amplifying every thought racing through his mind. He stood in the entryway, staring blankly at the framed photos on the wall. Smiling faces, stolen moments from a life that now felt like a distant lie. He moved to the living room, collapsing onto the sofa as if the weight of the evening had sapped all his strength. His hands gripped the edges of his knees, knuckles white, as he leaned forward, staring at the floor. The dim light from the street lamp outside cast faint shadows across the room, but nothing could soften the sharp edges of his thoughts. How long, he wondered, the question cutting into him like a knife. How long had she been lying to me, laughing with someone else while I thought we were building a future together? The memories came unbidden. Clara's smile when they first met, the late nights planning vacations they never took, her laughter echoing through the house. Each one now felt tainted, twisted into something false. His eyes fell on the coffee table, where a forgotten cup of Clara's tea still sat, the faint imprint of her lipstick on the rim. It was such a small, ordinary detail, yet it felt suffocating. Was she thinking about him while sitting here? He thought bitterly, the anger bubbling back to the surface. Lucas leaned back, running his hands through his hair as the question swirled. What else don't I know? Was this the first time, or just the first time I've seen it? And why? Wasn't I enough? His mind raced to fill the gaps, searching for answers that Clara hadn't given him, answers that might never come. He tried to replay moments that could explain it, the long hours at work, her distracted responses, the way she sometimes seemed so far away even when they were together. At the time, he had brushed it off as stress, a passing phase. But was that just me being blind, ignoring the signs because I didn't want to believe there was something wrong? The sound of his own voice startled him as he muttered bitterly, "How stupid could I be?" He shook his head, anger giving way to despair. I trusted her. I trusted us. Lucas stood abruptly, pacing the room as if movement could help him escape the thoughts clawing at him. His eyes caught the framed wedding photo on the bookshelf, and he stared at it for a long moment. Clara's eyes sparkled with joy in the picture, her smile radiant as she held his hand. It had felt so real then, so unshakable. Now, it felt like a cruel illusion. In that moment, he realized it wasn't just the betrayal that hurt. It was the possibility that everything they had built together had been a lie. Was she ever truly happy with me? Or was this always where we were headed? The silence was unbearable, pressing against his chest like a physical weight. He picked up his phone, his thumb hovering over Clara's contact. He thought about calling her, demanding answers, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. What could she possibly say to make this better? Nothing. He tossed the phone onto the couch with a frustrated sigh. As the night deepened, his thoughts grew darker. What if the betrayal he saw wasn't the whole story? What if there were more secrets, more lies waiting to unravel? The idea twisted in his gut, making him feel sick. Lucas clenched his fists, a resolve beginning to form. I need to know the truth. All of it. He glanced at the clock. It was nearing midnight. The house was still, the silence only broken by the faint ticking of the wall clock. It felt as if the world had stopped, trapping him in this endless loop of doubt and pain. Finally, he whispered to the empty room, his voice low and filled with a quiet determination. If she won't tell me, I'll find out myself. Lucas sat down again, his posture stiff as he stared into the darkness. The pain was still raw, but underneath it, something stronger was beginning to grow. A need to uncover the truth, no matter how devastating it might be. Because only then, he thought, could he figure out what was left of his life to salvage. The air in the living room was heavy, laden with an unspoken tension that made every second feel like an eternity. Clara sat on the edge of the sofa, her hands clasped tightly together as if trying to hold herself together. Lucas stood near the window, his back to her, staring into the darkness outside. His jaw was tight, his shoulders stiff. He hadn't said a word since she arrived, and the silence between them was unbearable. Lucas, Clara began, her voice trembling, I need to tell you everything. Everything Sophia didn't. He didn't move. You think there's more I need to know? His tone was sharp, biting. I've seen enough, Clara. What's left to say? Clara's eyes filled with tears, but she forced herself to continue. It's not just about what you saw at the party. There's more, so much more. And you deserve to know the truth. Lucas turned then, his gaze cold and unyielding. Then talk, he said simply, crossing his arms. Tell me everything. Alpha Sync looked at Lucas for a long moment. Clara took a deep breath, her voice barely a whisper. It started months ago. My boss, he noticed I was struggling, feeling distant, even from you. He said all the right things, made me feel seen, valued. I was vulnerable, Lucas, and I let him manipulate me. Lucas's expression darkened, his lips tightening. Manipulate you? Don't put this all on him, Clara. You made choices. Choices that destroyed us. I know, Clara's voice cracked, and she wiped at the tears streaming down her face. I know I made those choices, and I hate myself for it. But it wasn't just an affair, Lucas. He pulled me into something much worse. Lucas frowned, the anger in his eyes now mixed with confusion. Worse? What could possibly be worse than this? Clara hesitated, her fingers trembling as she clasped them together again. He convinced me to use our joint accounts, to invest in one of his projects. He promised it was a sure thing, a way to secure our future. I believed him. I thought I was helping us. But it was all a lie. Lucas froze, the words hitting him like a physical blow. You used our money? His voice was low, dangerous. Without telling me. Lucas hesitated. Clara nodded, her face pale. I didn't know it was fraudulent, Lucas. Not at first, but when I realized I was trapped. He had evidence, emails, messages. He threatened to ruin me if I didn't stay quiet. Lucas took a step closer, his anger barely restrained. And you didn't think to tell me? You let him blackmail you, drag you deeper into this mess, and you still didn't tell me. I was scared, Clara cried, her voice breaking. I was afraid of losing you, of what you'd think of me. And then it was too late. He had everything. I couldn't see a way out. Lucas turned away, running a hand through his hair. His mind raced with the implications. Their savings, their trust, everything they'd worked for was tainted. Do you have any idea what you've done? He said finally, his voice hollow. I do, Clara whispered. I've destroyed everything, but Lucas, I want to fix it. I want to make things right. He laughed bitterly, shaking his head. Right? How do you fix something like this, Clara? You betrayed me, emotionally, financially. And now you're telling me our lives are tied to a criminal? I have proof, Clara said quickly, desperation in her voice. Enough to expose him, to make him pay for what he's done. I just need your help. Lucas stared at her, a mix of anger, pain, and something else flickering in his eyes, perhaps the faintest glimmer of hope. You'd better be telling the truth, he said finally, because if you're lying to me again, there won't be anything left to save. Clara nodded, tears still streaming down her face. For the first time in months, she felt a fragile hope that redemption might be possible, but only if Lucas was willing to stand by her side. The plan came together in tense silence, each detail carefully dissected as Lucas and Clara sat at the dining table, papers and hastily scribbled notes spread before them. The dim light overhead cast shadows across their faces, a stark contrast to the raw emotions lingering between them. We need proof, Lucas said firmly, breaking the silence. His tone was sharp, almost clinical, but his clenched jaw betrayed the storm raging inside him. Something undeniable, emails, financial records, anything that links him directly to the fraud. Clara nodded, her hands trembling as she shuffled through her notes. He keeps backups in his private office, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I've seen him access them before. If we can get in... Maz recited the quotation. Lucas cut her off, his eyes narrowing. If? Clara, you've already put us in this mess. There can't be any ifs anymore. Her shoulders slumped, and for a moment, she looked like she might break under the weight of his words. I know, she said softly, her voice thick with guilt. I know this is my fault, Lucas, but I'm trying to make it right. Lucas turned away, staring out the window. His reflection stared back at him, hollow and tired. Why am I even doing this? He thought bitterly. She betrayed me, lied to me, and now I'm risking everything to clean up her mess. But beneath the anger, there was something else, an unspoken need to protect the life they had built, even if it was now in ruins. Clara's voice pulled him from his thoughts. He keeps the key to the filing cabinet in his desk drawer, and the passwords for his files are written in a notebook he carries. She paused, then added with hesitation. But I think I can guess them if we don't find the notebook. He's predictable. Lucas let out a sharp laugh, devoid of humor. Predictable enough to manipulate you into stealing from us. Clara flinched but didn't respond. She couldn't argue with the truth, no matter how much it hurt. Instead, she focused on the task ahead. I'll show you where the office is. He won't be there at night. It's his routine. Lucas grabbed his jacket, his movements sharp. Then we go. Now. Hey. The night was cold, the air heavy with an ominous stillness, as they parked a block away from the small, nondescript office building. Lucas scanned the area, his instincts sharp. This feels wrong, he thought, the tension in his chest growing with every step. But he pushed the feeling aside. They had come too far to back down now. Clara led the way, her steps hesitant. She glanced back at Lucas, guilt and desperation flickering in her eyes. Thank you, she whispered, though the words felt hollow. She wasn't sure if she was thanking him for helping or for not walking away from her completely. "Don't thank me yet," Lucas replied curtly, his voice a blade cutting through the night. Inside, the office was dark and silent, the faint smell of paper and cleaning supplies lingering in the air. Clara motioned toward the staircase. "Upstairs," she murmured. Lucas nodded, his focus razor-sharp. They moved quickly, their footsteps muffled on the worn carpet. At the door to the private office, Clara pulled out a small key. "I took this when he wasn't looking," she admitted, her voice laced with shame. Lucas said nothing, taking the key and unlocking the door with a quiet click. The office was as sterile and impersonal as Lucas had imagined. A sleek desk sat in the center, papers neatly stacked, with a locked filing cabinet beside it. Lucas moved toward the desk, rummaging through the drawers. "Look for the notebook," he said. Clara nodded, heading to the bookshelves. Her fingers trembled as she searched, the weight of her actions pressing down on her. "If we don't find what we need, if this doesn't end him—" She couldn't finish the thought. She wouldn't let herself. "Got it," Lucas said, holding up a slim notebook. He flipped through the pages, scanning for anything useful. Bank account numbers, transactions, passwords. This is it. Clara barely had time to respond before the sound of a car pulling up outside froze them both. Lucas shot her a sharp look. "You said he wouldn't be here." "I thought he wouldn't," she stammered, panic rising in her chest. Margaret laughed. "Absolutely." Lucas cursed under his breath, quickly shutting the notebook and tucking it into his jacket. "Bye," he hissed, pulling her behind a tall cabinet. The door creaked open and heavy footsteps echoed in the room. Lucas peeked through a crack, his breath shallow. It was him, Clara's boss. The man moved to the desk, muttering to himself as he rifled through the drawers. His movements were sharp, agitated, as if he knew something was off. Clara's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel Lucas tense beside her, his fists clenched. "Please don't find us," she thought desperately. "Not like this." But as the man reached for the cabinet, Lucas stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "Looking for something?" The man shook his head. The boss froze, his eyes narrowing as he turned toward Lucas. Clara stepped out from behind the cabinet, her face pale but determined. "It's over," she said, her voice steady despite the fear twisting inside her. The man's lips curled into a cold smile. "You think this is over? You have no idea what you're dealing with." Lucas took a step closer, his gaze hard as steel. "We know enough, and we're not afraid of you." The tension in the room crackled like a live wire, neither side willing to back down. The confrontation had begun, and there was no turning back. The office was shrouded in darkness, its lifeless hum only interrupted by the distant ticking of a clock. Lucas and Clara slipped inside, their movements careful and calculated. The air was tense, charged with the weight of what they were about to do. Lucas crouched by the filing cabinet, his breath shallow. His hands worked quickly but quietly, skimming through files and drawers for anything that might expose the man who had torn his life apart. Beside him, Clara scanned the shelves with trembling hands, the shame of her complicity pressing heavily on her chest. "This is my fault," she thought, biting her lip to stifle her guilt. "If I hadn't let him manipulate me, if I'd been stronger, we wouldn't be here." From across the room, Lucas's sharp whisper broke the silence. "Focus, Clara. Do you see anything?" His voice was low but edged with frustration, a reminder of his waning patience. "No," she murmured, her fingers brushing across a stack of envelopes. "But he keeps digital records too. We need those to make this airtight." Lucas straightened, the glare he shot her barely visible in the faint moonlight streaming through the blinds. "We're not leaving without it." His words were firm, almost cold. He didn't have the luxury of trust anymore, not after everything she'd done. Clara flinched but nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "I deserve this," she reminded herself, pushing aside the ache in her chest. I deserve every ounce of his anger. Ish. The room was still when the faint sound of tires crunching gravel reached Lucas's ears. His muscles tensed instantly. "Someone's here," he whispered, his voice urgent. Clara froze, her heart pounding in her chest. "It can't be," she stammered, her mind racing. "He wasn't supposed to be here. He never comes here at night." Lucas didn't waste time debating. He grabbed her arm and pulled her behind a tall bookcase near the corner of the room. The two crouched low, their breathing shallow, as footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. The door creaked open, and Lucas's heart raced. The silhouette of a man filled the doorway, his shoulders broad, his posture rigid. Lucas didn't need to see his face to know who it was. Clara's boss stepped inside, the beam of a small flashlight cutting through the darkness. He moved toward the desk, muttering to himself as he flipped through papers and drawers. Lucas clenched his fists, anger boiling beneath his skin. "This is the man who destroyed everything," he thought, his jaw tightening. "He doesn't deserve to walk away from this." Beside him, Clara's hands gripped her knees tightly. She could feel Lucas's tension, his barely contained rage. "He's here because of me," she thought bitterly. "I let him into my life. I let him ruin everything." As the man approached the filing cabinet, Lucas made a decision. He stepped out of the shadows, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "Looking for something." The man froze, the flashlight flickering as he turned sharply. His eyes narrowed when he saw Lucas, then shifted to Clara as she stepped out hesitantly from behind the bookcase. "Well," the boss said, his tone dripping with disdain, "this is unexpected." "Cut the act," Lucas snapped, his voice low and sharp. "We know what you've been doing, the fraud, the manipulation, the blackmail. It ends now." The boss's lips curled into a smirk. "You think you can stop me? You have no idea who you're dealing with." Lucas took a step closer, his fists clenched. "Maybe not, but I've got enough here to make you very uncomfortable." He pulled a folder from his jacket, holding it up like a weapon. "Bank records, transactions, contracts. You're done." The boss's smirk faltered, but his confidence didn't waver. "And you think that's enough?" he said, his voice cool. "You don't understand how this works, do you? You think you're in control, but you're not. I've made sure of that." Clara found her voice then, stepping forward despite the tremble in her legs. "You don't control me anymore," she said, her tone resolute. "I let you manipulate me once, but it ends here. I'm not afraid of you." The man laughed, the sound cold and sharp. "Not afraid? You should be. You think he'll forgive you for what you've done? For what you've put him through?" Clara's breath caught, but Lucas didn't hesitate. "This isn't about forgiveness," he said firmly. "This is about justice. You've taken enough from us." The boss's expression darkened, his posture shifting as if he were preparing for a fight. Lucas noticed and moved quickly, stepping between him and Clara. "Don't even think about it," Lucas warned, his voice icy. The tension in the room was suffocating, the air thick with unspoken threats. For a moment, no one moved. Then the boss took a step back, his smirk returning. "You'll regret this," he said, his voice low and venomous. "Both of you." Lucas didn't flinch. "Maybe," he said, his gaze steady, "but not as much as you're going to." The man left, his footsteps heavy as they faded down the hall. Clara collapsed onto the floor, her body shaking as the adrenaline wore off. "Lucas," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "Save it," he said, his tone harsh but weary. "We're not done yet." Clara nodded, wiping her tears. Despite everything, there was a flicker of hope in her chest. Lucas hadn't walked away. Not yet. Maybe, just maybe, they could find a way out of the darkness together. The room felt like a pressure cooker, the tension thick enough to cut through. Lucas stood firm, the folder of incriminating evidence clutched tightly in his hand. The dim light from the street lamp outside cast harsh shadows on the boss's face, distorting his smirk into something sinister. "You've done enough damage," Lucas said, his voice cold and controlled, though his heart hammered in his chest. "It's over. I'm taking this to the authorities." The boss chuckled, the sound low and mocking. "You think you're a hero, don't you? Huh? Marching in here with your little pile of papers. You don't understand the game you've stepped into." Lucas's jaw tightened. He took a step closer, his gaze sharp as steel. "I understand enough. Offshore accounts, fake contracts, embezzlement. All of it leads back to you. You're finished." For a moment, the boss's confidence wavered, his eyes narrowing as he sized up Lucas. Then his smirk returned, colder this time. "And what about her?" he said, jerking his chin toward Clara, who stood frozen a few steps behind Lucas. "Do you think she's innocent in all this? She's as dirty as I am." Clara flinched at the words, her guilt pressing down on her like a physical weight. "He's right," she thought bitterly. "I let this happen. I helped him." Lucas glanced back at her, his expression unreadable. Then he turned back to the boss, his voice steady. "She made a mistake, but she's not like you. She's done being your pawn." The boss took a step forward, his presence looming. "You think she's done? You think you're done? I own people like you, Lucas. You don't scare me." Lucas didn't flinch, his grip on the folder tightening. "Then try me," he said, his voice deadly calm. "Because the moment you make a move, this goes public. Every account, every scheme, every lie. You won't just lose your freedom, you'll lose everything." For the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed the boss's face. He hesitated, his smirk faltering. The silence stretched, heavy and oppressive, before he finally stepped back. "You'll regret this," he said, his voice dripping with venom. "Both of you." Lucas didn't respond. He held his ground, watching as the boss turned and left, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. When the doors slammed shut, Clara let out a shaky breath, her legs giving out as she collapsed into a chair. "Lucas," she began, her voice trembling. He raised a hand, cutting her off. His gaze was still fixed on the door, his expression hard. "Not now," he said quietly. "This isn't over." But for the first time, Clara saw a faint glimmer of hope in his eyes. Hope that, despite everything, they might still have a chance to reclaim what was lost. The sterile walls of the investigator's office felt suffocating. Yet Lucas sat with an unyielding resolve. Beside him, Clara clutched the edge of her chair, her fingers trembling as they rested against the polished surface of the desk. Between them and the investigator lay a thick folder, filled with bank statements, emails, and contracts that spelled the downfall of a man who had thrived on deception. "This is everything," Lucas said, his voice steady but heavy with exhaustion. "Accounts, transactions, the evidence of offshore laundering. It's all there." The investigator, a seasoned woman with sharp eyes, nodded as she flipped through the documents. Her expression hardened with each page. "This is damning," she said, glancing at the pair. "You've done your part. We'll take it from here." Clara exhaled shakily, relief mingling with lingering guilt. She hadn't spoken much, letting Lucas handle most of the conversation. "He's carrying the weight I placed on him," she thought bitterly, "and I don't know if I'll ever deserve his forgiveness." Morning? 2 weeks later, the news broke. Clara's boss was arrested in a publicized raid, his smirk nowhere to be seen as he was led in handcuffs from his lavish home. Reporters shouted questions, their cameras flashing, but he kept his head low. The once untouchable executive was now the face of a massive corporate scandal. For Lucas, the sight of the man being escorted into a squad car brought a fleeting sense of justice. "It's done," he thought, though the hollow ache in his chest remained. He had fought for the truth, for accountability, but the scars left by the betrayal were far from healed. Clara watched the coverage from their living room, her heart heavy. She had seen the victims' names in the reports, families who had lost savings, employees whose pensions had vanished. and now their voices were finally being heard. At least they'll get closure, she told herself, even as doubt gnawed at her. But what about us? The victims began to rebuild. Settlements were announced, and stolen funds were traced back to hidden accounts. For the first time in years, those who had suffered under the boss's schemes had a chance to start over. But for Lucas and Clara, the road ahead remained uncertain. The man responsible was gone, yet the damage he had caused between them lingered. As Clara turned to Lucas that evening, she whispered, "We did the right thing, didn't we?" Lucas met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "We brought him down," he said simply. But right doesn't mean easy. And in that moment, both of them knew that while justice had been served, the journey to find peace, both together and apart, was just beginning. The house felt different now, quieter, colder, as though the confrontation with Clara's boss had taken more than just the illusion of trust. It had stripped away the ease, the shared comfort that Lucas and Clara once took for granted. Lucas moved through the kitchen with practiced efficiency, pouring coffee and staring out the window at the morning light breaking over the horizon. He felt the silence pressing against him, heavy and oppressive. Clara sat at the dining table, her hands wrapped around a mug, her gaze fixed on the steam curling upward. She looked smaller somehow, as though carrying the weight of her guilt had physically diminished her. "Lucas," she began softly, her voice tentative, I need to say again how sorry I am. For everything." He didn't look at her, didn't respond immediately. Instead, he took a slow sip of his coffee, letting the bitterness ground him. "She's said it before. Sorry doesn't change what's already broken," he thought, his jaw tightening. When he finally spoke, his tone was measured, distant. "I know you are. But sorry doesn't fix this, Clara. You know that." Her shoulders sagged at his words, the flicker of hope in her chest dimming. She nodded, more to herself than to him. What did I expect? That he'd forgive me overnight? That working together to take down my boss would magically repair what I shattered? She clenched her mug tighter, her nails digging into her palm. I deserve his coldness. I deserve worse. Lucas's internal battle raged, even as he maintained his cool exterior. Why can't I move past this? He wondered, his thoughts like a storm. We stopped him. We did the right thing. But every time I look at her, all I see is the betrayal. He glanced at Clara out of the corner of his eye, seeing the exhaustion etched into her face, the regret that seemed to hang over her like a shadow. And yet, she stayed. She fought to make it right. Doesn't that count for something? But another voice in his mind whispered, what if it happens again? What if I let my guard down and it all falls apart again? Clara spent her days trying to atone, though she wasn't sure what form redemption could take. She threw herself into volunteer work at a local shelter, spending hours helping others rebuild their lives. She found small solace in their gratitude, but it never lasted long. You can't undo what you did, Clara, she reminded herself every night. You can only hope to be better. One evening, as she returned home, she found Lucas sitting on the couch, a book in his hands. He didn't look up when she walked in, but she felt his tension. She hesitated in the doorway, unsure whether to speak or retreat to the solitude of the bedroom. Lucas, she said softly, testing the fragile silence. He sighed, closing the book and setting it aside. His gaze met hers, unreadable. What is it? I just wanted to know if you'll ever be able to forgive me, she admitted, her voice trembling. Not now, not soon, but someday. Lucas's expression hardened for a moment, but then softened, just slightly. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, and exhaled deeply. I don't know, Clara, he said honestly. I want to believe I can, but it's not something I can force. It'll take time, if it's even possible. Her heart clenched at his words, both for the honesty and the uncertainty. She nodded, forcing herself to accept it. I understand. I'll wait as long as it takes. Lucas looked at her, his own emotions swirling in his chest. He wanted to let go of the anger, the pain, but the wounds were too fresh. Still, as he watched her retreat down the hallway, he couldn't ignore the faint stirrings of something else, something that felt like hope. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Clara stood in the doorway of the living room, her heart pounding as she watched Lucas pack a small duffel bag. The sight was both heartbreaking and inevitable. She swallowed the lump in her throat, stepping forward cautiously. "Lucas," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can we talk?" He didn't pause, methodically folding a sweater and placing it into the bag. "What is there to talk about, Clara?" he asked, his tone even, though she could hear the undercurrent of exhaustion. Clara took a deep breath, willing herself not to cry. "Everything. Us. I know I've hurt you in ways I can't take back, but I need you to know I still love you. I always have." Lucas froze for a moment, his hand hovering over the bag. He straightened, turning to face her. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes betrayed the storm inside him. "Love isn't enough, Clara," he said quietly. "Love didn't stop you from betraying me, from breaking what we had." Her breath hitched, but she pressed on. "I know, and I don't expect you to forgive me. Not now, maybe not ever, but I can't let you go without asking, is there any future for us? Anything left to rebuild?" Lucas's jaw tightened as he looked at her, his heart warring between anger and the faintest flicker of hope. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know, Clara. I can't give you an answer right now. What I do know is that I need time to figure out who I am without all of this. Without you." Tears spilled down her cheeks as she nodded, her voice breaking. "I'll wait," she said, "as long as it takes." Lucas picked up his bag, pausing at the door. "Take care of yourself, Clara," he said softly, before walking out, leaving her standing alone in the quiet house, the weight of his absence settling over her like a storm cloud. The city greeted Lucas with a mix of uncertainty and quiet promise. The streets were unfamiliar, bustling with life that he hadn't yet become a part of, but that was exactly what he needed, a blank slate. The apartment he rented was modest but cozy, its small balcony offering a view of the skyline that he found oddly comforting. Each day felt like a cautious step toward something new. He spent his mornings exploring, walking through parks and stopping by coffee shops, letting the rhythm of the city settle around him. In those early weeks, he spoke little to anyone, preferring the solitude that allowed him to piece together who he was outside the wreckage of his past. One afternoon, while visiting a local art gallery, he met Anna. She was setting up an exhibit, her hair pulled into a loose bun, strands falling over her face as she adjusted frames. There was a quiet energy about her, something grounded yet vibrant. When he commented on a photograph, a serene landscape of rolling hills, she turned to him, her eyes lighting up as she explained the story behind the shot. Their conversation started casually, first about art, then about life. Anna had a warmth Lucas hadn't realized he was craving, her laughter gentle and unassuming. She didn't pry into his past, and for that he was grateful. Their connection grew slowly, built on shared moments and unspoken understanding. For the first time in a long while, Lucas felt a flicker of hope, not just for a fresh start, but for a future that wasn't weighed down by the shadows of his past. Clara stood outside the office building for the last time, her resignation letter still fresh in her hands. The weight of her choices pressed against her chest, but walking away from the place that had fueled so much of her regret felt like a small, necessary step toward redemption. She had no plan, no clear path forward, only the knowledge that she couldn't stay the same person anymore. The first few weeks were spent in silence, her days blending together as she searched for meaning in the chaos of her mistakes. Then, almost on a whim, she walked into a local community center. The bulletin board, cluttered with flyers, caught her eye. Volunteers needed. Homeless outreach program. She hesitated for only a moment before signing up. At first, the work felt overwhelming, listening to stories of loss, pain, and resilience. Yet, as the weeks passed, Clara found herself growing stronger. Each small act, serving a warm meal, offering a kind word, helping someone secure a job interview, felt like a brick in the foundation of a new version of herself. This isn't about erasing the past, she thought. It's about learning how to live with it. The people she helped began to see her not as a broken woman seeking penance, but as someone who genuinely cared. Slowly, she started to see herself that way too. For the first time in months, Clara felt a flicker of purpose, a light guiding her toward the person she wanted to become. The courtroom was packed the day the boss was sentenced. His arrogance had vanished, replaced by a hollow look as the judge delivered the verdict. Years in prison for fraud, embezzlement, and financial manipulation. The evidence Lucas and Clara had provided had been instrumental, leaving no room for his defense. For the victims, justice brought relief. Restitution funds recovered from hidden accounts began trickling back, offering a chance to rebuild lives once devastated by his schemes. Families regained their savings, and employees found closure. The boss's downfall became a stark reminder that no one is untouchable when the truth comes to light. Betrayal carved deep scars in their lives, reshaping their identities. For Lucas, it became a lesson in resilience and the courage to trust again. For Clara, it was a catalyst for introspection and transformation. Though their paths diverged, each found strength in starting anew, proving that, even from brokenness, growth is possible.